Yeah. So I have two last questions, one of which is if you have two pieces of advice, two short pieces of advice that you would give to an emerging rabbi, um, who's embarking on his speaking career from the pulpit, what would those two primary pieces of advice be?
Number one, my experience with the rabbinic internship program, which I love and I appreciate doing, and I was a beneficiary of, is very often, not always, but very often, the experience of our musmachim is very insular. You grew up in a frum community and you went to a Jewish day school and you spent time in Eretz Yisrael and your college experience was at YU and you like learning morning Seder and night Seder and you have no exposure to what's going on in the world. So number one, you don't really get the values or the life experiences of the people in your audience. I always tell my interns, your audience did not go to smicha, you did. You have to know who they are, and you have to find a way to connect to what's going on around you. So you have to read and you have to listen and you have to watch to what everyone else is doing. Find a magazine or a book or something that can give you a sense of what's going on in the culture. For a number of years, and this was my own experience. I had no idea what was going on in the world and what people were thinking about and what they were reading. And I had a subscription to the Atlantic magazine years ago, like in my earlier assistant rabbi days, before the Trump era where everything became about politics all the time. And you just read the magazine to see like what people are researching and what they're talking about. And we lived through all these experiences like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and extreme right-wing politics and left-wing anti-Semitism and all these things and culture. What are people writing about? What are people reading? What kind of movies are coming out? What's going on in the sports world? What's going on in the professional world? Like what's going on in the business world and in medicine and things like that. And if you have no idea what's going on, you can't relate to people about what all you're doing is, Kulo Torah, which is amazing, but it's not relevant for your audience necessarily. So the first piece of advice is get as much exposure to the world around you in as the safest way possible as you possibly can. Find something or things to read and watch and learn to really tap in to the cultural experience of what it is to be a congregant, what it is to be maybe an American, for this audience, and try and do that as often as possible so you can really relate to people effectively. I think that's probably my first and most important piece of advice to the young rabbis coming out. The second piece of advice is learn to get really excellent feedback, true feedback, everywhere you possibly can. When you're an intern and an assistant, I was zoche to be an intern and an associate and an assistant for many years. So I got plenty of feedback from my senior rabbinic mentors. Lots of our rabbanim become rabbis of small shuls in their late 20s, and then they go from there to other shuls, and they never have real mentorship, real honest feedback ever again. So you have to get it from your congregants, or you have to ask for a mentor. We give hundreds of speeches a year, and maybe people like them, maybe they don't, but it's very hard to grow because no one's telling you, you have this really bad habit that you picked up the last 6 months. You got to work it out. And I think that when you're an intern, number one, you have a mentor who could just tell you the truth, like that drasha was boring, and that's okay. Like you have to hear that from somebody, or that point was offensive. Or it just doesn't look like you're trying hard enough, or whatever the feedback might be. But also to learn how to really gauge your audience. You ask an intern, what do you think people thought of your drasha? And they'll say, oh, everyone at Kiddush said, nice job, kid. So I think I did great, 10 out of 10. The MS is, the difference from as a professional. How many emails did you get after Shabbos? How many people bought the book that you read, that you quoted from? How many people objected to your point because they see the world differently than you do? And they were listening to you carefully and they gave you a chance, but they said, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you about that. I mean, that means that people care about the subject and they're listening to you and they want to wait. People hate waiting for their rabbi after shul. There's just, on a good day, there's a lot of people who want to talk to you. And if the idea is, well, if I pass him on the street, I'll tell him that I thought that story was funny, is not the same thing as saying to your spouse, I got to talk to the rabbi, like, give me 5 minutes, and waiting to share feedback that they think is important, or a counterpoint that they think is important, or hakar satov, that you spoke about something that was important to them. I remember one year at Yisker talking about how hard it is to say Yisker for relatives in our family that disappointed us, and how painful it is to feel like every Yisker is about how much we loved our parents and grandparents and siblings and aunts and uncles, when sometimes we're saying Yisker for someone who we're still mad at. And I remember getting multiple phone calls from people. One person asked me to borrow the book that I quoted from, and I lent it to them, and I went to their house and dropped it off, and they just unloaded all of the pain that they'd experienced all these years because someone finally addressed it at Yisker, that how much they hate Yisker for that reason. So I know that drasha touched somebody. It's not the same as somebody patting you on the back and saying, "Ah, good job, good joke." That's not real feedback. Or it is, that the drasha just wasn't there. You have to learn how to continue to grow, and you have to learn how to get real quality feedback to understand how good of a job you're doing.